What if I told you that the legal document dictating your family's entire financial future is, well, it's likely being drafted while both you and your lawyer are secretly having a subconscious psychological meltdown?
I mean, it's a wild thought, right? Because we all know that contemplating our own mortality is deeply uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. But today, we are not just acknowledging that basic human fear, we're actually analyzing the massive systemic, institutional consequences of it.
Yeah, we're looking at how entire industries, from law to philanthropy, have essentially had to construct these elaborate multi-billion-dollar psychological workarounds just to get humans to do basic estate planning.
Right. And welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Our goal today is to take a stack of seemingly disparate sources, cut through all the noise, and extract those perfect aha moments for you without the information overload.
Exactly. And this one completely shatters the illusion of the law office as this place of cold, hard logic. Because we sort of expect estate planning to be an administrative formula, right?
Yeah.
Like input numbers, output a legally binding document.
But the reality is, it's a landscape that is deeply emotional, highly irrational, and just defined by psychological muddy waters. So today we are examining two fascinating sources at the intersection of our wealth and our mortality.
Yeah, and they span quite a few decades.
They really do. The first is a seminal 1972 Law Review article by Thomas L. Schaffer from the Notre Dame Law School, and it's titled Estate Planning Games.
And then the second one jumps us forward to a 2016 webinar presentation from PG Calc. And that one is focused on harnessing the power of the Bequest challenge match.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a 50-year-old legal critique on one hand and a modern nonprofit fundraising playbook on the other.
Right, and on the surface, they seem completely unrelated, but they're actually diagnosing and treating the exact same behavioral paralysis.
Which is fascinating. So let's start with Schaffer's 1972 paper. Because before we can understand how charities convince people to give away their money after they die, we have to understand why talking about death and money is so difficult in the first place.
Absolutely. So Schaffer sets this really bold premise in his paper. He argues that the decisions a client makes in a lawyer's office are legal decisions in every sense. They are essentially as final and consequential for that family as a ruling by the Supreme Court.
Wow, the Supreme Court of the Law Office. That's a heavy way to look at it.
It is, because that document dictates the financial reality of the surviving family members. It overrides tax policies, IRS directives, everything. But Schaffer points out a terrifying variable here.
And what's that?
These monumental decisions are heavily warped by the, quote, peculiar psychic makeup of the lawyer sitting across the desk.
Right, so the counselor's own attitudes, their hidden biases, and their own hang-ups dictate the outcome just as much as the actual law does.
Exactly. And Schaffer uses this specific psychological framework to explain it. He relies on Dr. Eric Berney's transactional analysis.
Oh, from the book Games People Play. Right. Our listeners might recognize that one.
Yes, exactly that one. The core concept there is that human interactions naturally fall into three distinct ego states. First, you have parent patterns, which are, authoritative, protective, or dictatorial.
Okay.
Then you have child patterns. These are submissive, spontaneous, or sometimes avoidant. And finally, there are adult patterns, which represent candid, honest, here-and-now communication.
Wait, so what does this all mean in practice? It sounds like you're saying the law office is secretly a therapist's couch, but neither the lawyer nor the client will actually admit they're in therapy.
That is exactly what it is. And to understand why the brain defaults to these specific parent or child roles in a law office, we have to look at thanatology.
Which is the study of death and dying, right?
Exactly. Thanatology reveals that under the stress of mortality, the human brain instinctively regresses. Death represents the ultimate loss of control.
I mean, that makes total sense. When a client walks into an estate planner's office, they are actively being forced to confront their own end.
Yes. And that existential dread triggers a regression to a child state. They subconsciously seek a protector, someone to just absorb the anxiety for them.
And meanwhile, the lawyer is sitting there dealing with their own mortality anxiety, plus the emotional weight the client just brought into the room, so they desperately want to avoid the emotional weight, and they fall into these highly predictable, toxic behavioral traps.
Precisely. And Schaffer categorizes these into three specific games. He uses a fictionalized client named Charles March to illustrate how devastating they can be.
So let's break these games down. What's the first one?
The first game Schaffer identifies is called I'm in charge here. This is a classic parent-child dynamic where the lawyer, who he names Desmond Dominant, aggressively takes on the parent role.
Desmond dominant. I love the naming convention here. So Desmond just pushes the client around.
Basically, yeah, he makes sweeping assumptions about what Charles March needs. In this scenario, Charles March is an elderly man looking to provide for his wife and his sister.
And Desmond, reflecting the societal biases of 1972, immediately assumes the women are entirely incapable of managing investments. I think the paper literally calls Desmond a blatant male chauvinist.
It does. And instead of asking what the family actually needs, Desmond just forces a highly restrictive, rigid trust structure onto the client, supposedly to protect the women from themselves.
Right, so he's operating as a structural shield. But what's the actual payoff here? Why do they play this game?
The psychological payoff is the real mechanism. By taking total dictatorial control, the lawyer avoids dealing with any complicated, messy feelings. He doesn't have to listen to his client's fears.
And the client, acting as the submissive child, gets what he secretly wants too. He is protected from the terrifying reality of death. He literally pays the lawyer to carry the emotional burden for him.
Exactly. It's this toxic codependency built entirely on avoidance, which leads us to the second game, called Whatever You Want.
Okay, so who is the lawyer in this one?
This is Elmer Easy. Now, this is still a parent-child game, but the dynamic is inverted. The client acts as the demanding parent, and the lawyer shrinks into the submissive child role.
Oh, so the lawyer just takes orders without offering any professional pushback.
Right. Elmer is the attorney who drafts a boilerplate will in 15 minutes and charges $35. He doesn't challenge the client's assumptions. He doesn't probe into the family dynamic at all.
He just executes the immediate command to get the client out of his office as quickly as possible. But the financial devastation of that apathy is staggering.
It really is. Schaefer highlights that Elmer's lazy approach completely ignores basic tax strategies available at the time.
Yeah, I read that a properly structured plan could have saved Charles March anywhere from $16,000 to $52,000 in taxes, but Elmer just stamps the paperwork.
Because on a psychological level, Elmer's transactional speed is his defense mechanism. By minimizing the interaction to just 15 minutes of clerical work, Elmer completely avoids the complex emotional labor of estate planning.
His internal monologue is essentially, I don't want to deal with the reality of your death either, so let's just get this over with.
Exactly. Schaefer calls it social interaction at the level of total torpor, just complete numbness.
Wow. Okay, then we arrive at the third game, which honestly might be the most insidious of all. It's called I Know What You Want.
Ah, yes. The lawyer here is Ingram Interpreter. This is another parent-child game, but it relies heavily on manipulation and intellectual superiority.
Right. Ingram uses dense technical jargon to deliberately confuse the client and maintain a power imbalance. Like, when Charles March asks for clarification on a specific mechanism, Ingram just brushes it off.
Yeah, he calls it an insignificant technicality or a lawyer's gimmick, and essentially tells the client to leave the heavy lifting to him.
He throws around terms like power of appointment, which is really just a legal mechanism giving someone else the authority to distribute your property later. But he refuses to explain it.
Right. He makes it sound like this mystical legal decree that mere mortals can't understand, and this appeals directly to the client's vanity.
Oh, the look ma no hands attitude. The client pretends to understand the jargon just so they don't look foolish. They convince themselves that they're paying the lawyer to do the thinking.
Exactly. But the end result is a client signing documents they fundamentally do not comprehend, leaving the lawyer to manipulate the family's entire future. It strips the client of their agency under the guise of professional service.
Yeah, the client's wife, for example, is treated as a non-person who will simply live out her days in complete ignorance of her own property rights. All because the lawyer wanted to maintain the intellectual upper hand to avoid a genuine human connection.
It's tragic, really.
So if all these games are basically defense mechanisms and the root of the problem is treating the client like a helpless child, what does a healthy version of this actually look like?
Well, the healthy adult alternative requires radical transparency. The lawyer has to step down from the podium and treat the client as an equal.
So no more hiding behind jargon or 15-minute brush-off.
Right. That is the core of Schaefer's thesis. A healthy counselor acts as a companion. It requires deep sensitivity to the client's worldview and honest human communication.
They have to trust the client enough to level with them, treating a tool like a trust not as a rigid rule from the past, but as a creative adventure to empower the client in the present.
Exactly. But here's the major pivot. If these toxic lawyer-client games result in poorly planned, avoidant wills, the people who suffer most are often the beneficiaries. and especially charities.
Oh, absolutely. Which forces us to ask the big question. How does a nonprofit survive when its entire revenue model relies on people successfully navigating a legal process they are psychologically terrified of?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question,
Yeah.
because charities have historically struggled with planned giving. Asking someone to leave a bequest in their will means asking them to voluntarily confront their own mortality.
Right. If people fall into dysfunctional games just to draft a simple will for their own spouses, convincing them to engage with that dread for a third-party organization is a monumental hurdle.
And this brings us to the 2016 PG Calc webinar, which honestly completely blows the doors off this problem.
Yes. I was so fascinated by this part. The solution they highlight is called the Bequest Challenge Match, pioneered by an investor named Robert W. Wilson.
Wilson was brilliant because he realized that the traditional nonprofit matching model was fundamentally flawed when applied to estate planning.
Because in a traditional match, a charity says, if you give us $100 in cash today, a major donor will match it with another $100 in cash today. It relies on immediate, liquid assets.
Exactly. But Wilson flipped the architecture of the match entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He structured it so that an intention to leave a future gift in a will or bequest triggers immediate cash from a matching funder today.
Right. The charity effectively bridges the gap between the donor's present and future self. The standard model outlined in the webinar is a 10% match.
So how does that work in practice?
So if a donor notifies the charity that they are leaving a $50,000 bequest in their will, that simple notification triggers an immediate $5,000 cash donation to the charity from the matching funder's pool.
That is brilliant. This is basically the ultimate procrastinator's bonus.
It really is. There's usually a cap, like a maximum match of $10,000 per donor, just to ensure the fund isn't drained by a single massive estate. But the underlying mechanism is incredibly powerful.
It solves the behavioral economics problem of temporal discounting. Usually, writing a will offers absolutely no immediate reward to your present self.
Right. The human brain struggles to value a reward that only materializes after it ceases to exist. All the benefit goes to your future self after you're gone.
But the Bequest Challenge brings that altruistic reward into the present. You get the immediate dopamine hit of unlocking thousands of dollars for a cause you love today without actually spending a dime out of your current checking account.
And connecting this back to Schaffer's 1972 paper, the psychology at play here is just a masterful hack. The charity is completely short-circuiting the client's child instinct to avoid the anxiety of death.
Yes. Planning a bequest is no longer this morbid, lonely task centered on mortality.
Exactly. The challenge match changes the framing entirely. It gives the donor a joyful, life-affirming reason to finalize their estate planning right now. It replaces the dread of death with the immediate gratification of impact.
And by changing that psychological framing from death and legacy to immediate impact, these charities entirely transformed how they operate internally, too.
Oh, the internal culture shift is huge, because fundraisers are often just as uncomfortable bringing up death as the donors are.
I mean, naturally, they don't want to sound like vultures asking for a cut of the estate.
Right. But the organizational benefits detailed in the webinar show that the challenge match energizes the entire staff because it removes the awkwardness.
The conversation isn't about the end of life anymore. It becomes an exciting, time-sensitive opportunity. Fundraisers can say, we have this amazing matching fund available right now. Let me tell you how your future planning can unlock cash for our mission today.
It grants them permission to initiate the conversation without feeling morbid.
But I found myself wondering while reviewing the sources, are these future gifts actually real? I mean, if a donor just promises to leave money in their will to unlock a cash match today, what's stopping them from quietly changing their will the next day once the match is paid out?
That is the most common concern. But the data presented in the webinar directly addresses it, and it is overwhelmingly reassuring. They cite a 2007 study by Russell James, who is a leading researcher in charitable giving.
And what did he find?
He found that only 5.9% of charitable bequests are ever revoked.
Wow, less than 6%. Wait, really? That means the commitment mechanism is remarkably strong.
It is. Once a donor crosses that psychological threshold and formalizes their intent, they stick to it. The act of claiming the match cements their identity as a major supporter of the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. And the data also revealed the staggering reality of the hidden wealth pyramid in planned giving, right?
Yes. The numbers from organizations like the ACLU and the Environmental Defense Fund are just wild. The data showed that 70% bequest dollars come from just the top 10% of donors.
70% from the top 10%. The wealth is incredibly concentrated at the very top.
Right. The ACLU, for example, saw 7 individual gifts that were between $5 million and $10 million. Compare that to the 1,700 gifts they received that were under $100,000.
That's a massive difference.
It proves that while broad marketing is necessary, the vast majority of planned giving revenue relies on unlocking a few highly affluent donors who might otherwise, just procrastinate their estate planning.
And once charities realized how concentrated that wealth was, they started getting highly creative with the match formulas to incentivize those specific high net worth individuals.
Exactly. The ACLU didn't just stick to the standard 10% rule. They escalated the match to 20% for bequests up to $1 million.
And didn't they even add a 5% match for amounts over that? That structural escalation is how they unlock those massive $5 million pledges.
Yes, they did. And they even engineered a workaround for privacy, because many high net worth donors are notoriously private and refuse to disclose the exact amount of their future bequest.
Right, they don't want to be hounded. So instead of losing those donors, the charity offers a nominal flat match, such as $100, just to get the donor to raise their hand and say, yes, you are in my will.
Exactly. That simple acknowledgement gets the donor on the books, which allows the charity to start stewarding that vital relationship.
Okay, I need to push back on this entire framework for a moment, though, because we just spent the first half of this deep dive criticizing lawyers in the 1970s for manipulating their clients' psychological vulnerabilities.
Right.
So if a charity is dangling immediate cash to bypass a donor's natural defense mechanisms and manipulate them into drafting a will, aren't they just playing another version of a parent-child game? Like, isn't this just a gamified version of I know what you want?
It is a very fair critique.
Hmm.
But if you analyze the mechanics of the exchange, it shows it is actually the opposite. The bequest challenge moves planned giving out of a mystical, purely emotional appeal and transforms it into a true adult-adult partnership.
How so? How does offering a psychological loophole make it an adult interaction?
Because it is fundamentally transparent and data-driven. There is no hidden agenda, there is no obscure jargon masking the intent, and there is absolutely no coercion.
I see. So the charity is presenting a clear mathematical proposition, like, here is an incentive structure, it helps us secure immediate funding today, and it empowers you to finalize the planning you've been avoiding.
Exactly. It respects the donor's agency. Furthermore, it forces the charity to operate as a rational adult organization.
The webinar backed that up with the return on investment metrics, right? Because they are seeing $30 in future gifts for every single dollar spent on marketing the challenge.
Yes. By gathering concrete data, knowing exactly how many people are committing and estimating the future value of those estates, the charity can project future cash flows with startling accuracy.
It removes the black magic and the guesswork from nonprofit sustainability. It allows the organization to plan for its long-term survival based on hard mathematics rather than just, hoping for a windfall.
Exactly.
We really went on a journey today. We started in the anxiety-ridden paternalistic law offices of the 1970s, where the fear of mortality forced professionals and clients into playing toxic, avoidant psychological games.
We did.
And we traveled all the way to the data-driven, highly incentivized nonprofit models of today, where that exact same fear of death is systematically bypassed using behavioral economics and the Bequest challenge.
It serves as a profound case study on how deeply our subconscious hang-ups shape entire industries. I mean, the legal profession historically allowed the anxiety of death to degrade their service,
Right.
while modern philanthropy realized that a slight shift in perspective, just offering a present-day reward to bridge the gap to a future certainty, could unlock billions of dollars for the greater good.
So, to you listening, whether you are sitting down to draft your own will, navigating a tricky power dynamic with a professional, be it a lawyer, a financial advisor, or even a doctor, or deciding how to structure your charitable giving, recognizing these psychological games is your very first step.
Absolutely.
When you understand the behavioral triggers at play and acknowledge the underlying anxieties in the room, you can ensure you're operating as an empowered adult, making choices with true freedom and information rather than just reacting to fear.
And looking at how effectively charities have gamified our own mortality to secure their financial futures leaves us with a compelling, broader question to think about.
What's that?
Well, if temporal discounting and present-day matching incentives can solve the massive psychological gridlock of estate planning, what other uncomfortable, easily procrastinated life tasks could we hack using this exact same behavioral loophole?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating application of the concept.
Right. Could we use a similar immediate reward structure to finally get people to sign advanced healthcare directives? Or to drastically increase aggressive saving for retirement among younger demographics?
We culturally avoid those tasks because they force us to confront aging, vulnerability, and death.
Exactly. But if the nonprofit sector has successfully hacked the psychology of the bequest, the potential to apply this architecture to other vital areas of human resistance is, honestly, virtually limitless.
It brings us right back to the core realization we started with. Life and death decisions are never just cold math or administrative formulas. They are deeply emotional, they are messy, and they are inherently human.
Completely agree.
But once you understand the psychological game being played behind the scenes, you gain the power to change the rules. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you and keep seeking those aha moments.